Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live recording of our podcast. It's great to have you here with us at Digifest 2026. My name is Paola Marchionni. I'm Head of Engagement in the Digital Transformation team at Jisc. And today we're looking at how academic libraries are taking digital transformation from ambition to coordinated action, and the complexities they have to navigate across people, systems, and changing priorities. We're joined by three fantastic speakers who bring real-world experience and are currently participating in the Jisc Digital Transformation Library Lens program. The Library Lens is a resource that we have created together with libraries, and it's based on the Jisc Digital Transformation Framework for higher education, and was created with libraries to support them to enhance, amplify, and evidence their role and impact in digital transformation. So please join me in welcoming Rachel Scott-Halls, Director of Library and Archives at Buckinghamshire New University, Kay Grieves, Deputy Director, Teaching, Learning and Research and Student and Library Services at Teesside University, and George McGregor, Assistant Director, Digital Library, University of Glasgow. So just to start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your institution, and what digital transformation means to you right now? Rachel?
Sure. So I've been at Buckinghamshire New University for 3 years in the role sort of heading up library services there. Initially started as an interim head, which was in itself a new post, and actually formed Library and Archives as its own directorate, moving out of student success about 2 years ago now. So we're very new as our own sort of, as an entity within the organisation. Buckinghamshire New University itself, much like any other university at the moment, has gone through a huge amount of change in a very short space of time. And probably like most of the rest of us is not going to stop that pace of change anytime soon. We've just had a change of leadership, so I have a new Vice-Chancellor, and obviously that changes shifts in strategic direction, with our new strategy being published later this month. And the university itself, as I said, is a small, very teaching-intensive university, and I think quite uniquely, certainly amongst this panel and many other universities, we've got a very high proportion of our students are actually taught at collaborative partners, both either in the UK or overseas. In terms of digital transformation, for me, sort of personally, it's around that situating the library or positioning and working out what the position of the library is within the institution and embedding that where we fit in with digital across the whole institution. I think unlike many other departments in universities, we actually touch on so many different aspects of a university. We have huge estates that we manage, with study spaces, physical buildings, etc. But we also touch on the academic with the resources and the skills. And it's around looking at and bringing that sort of human, that understanding of how the whole university works, but the human side of that to the digital transformation, rather than just getting a tool and thinking, wow, that's brilliant, that's going to solve all of our problems. It's actually, why are we redesigning and then designing around that tool? How do we get the right thing in the first place and make those right decisions? And it's embedding that culturally across the institution from our position in that centre.
Thank you. Kay?
Thank you. So I'm Kay Grieves. I've been at Teesside also for about 3 years. And the library at Teesside is part of a converged service, so quite a large service called Student Life. And that is really helping us, actually. I think that's quite relevant in our digital transformation journey. Teesside itself is very much a university committed to widening participation. A huge amount of our students are first-generation students in higher education, and we have quite a lot of international students as well. In terms of digital transformation, I think it's fair to say that Teesside is really very ambitious in that area, a huge amount of energy. Future-facing learning is written into the university's strategic plan. It's something that the university executive are really committed to, and that's really good for us because that really does give us the impetus to fulfil what we want to fulfil. In terms of what digital transformation is all about, for us in the library, it's very much about cultural change, very much about people, connections, building relationships, and focusing on the people and the human side of transformation, rather than perhaps getting hung up on the tools or the tech. We're in a position where we've just done a big restructure in the library, and this is one of the core pillars, really, is about that confident leadership role in what the library can bring to the university, how the library can underpin the curriculum and the ambitions of the university. And we have a real commitment, I think, to try and develop in our staff that culture of curiosity, of exploration, of holding hands and doing this together and making it fun, and experimenting and exploring. And I would say also it's about trying to get the things that worry people about digital transformation and AI out into the open, and have those conversations, and really move from perhaps where we started, which was a little bit of a cautious position, into much more being about instilling confidence in ourselves and in our students.
Great, thank you. And George?
Hi, so my name is George McGregor. I'm Assistant Director of Digital Libraries at the University of Glasgow, and I'm relatively new to the institution, so I'm a sort of new digital leader, and I guess it's a position that I'm tentatively exploring, partly through the Library Lens initiative. During my career, I've kind of shimmered between research and academia, and also as a practitioner. And in some ways, that has given me a unique insight into the way that the University of Glasgow operates. It's a very old institution, as I'm sure many of you are aware. It's celebrating a significant birthday this year, 475 years, I think. So it's an ancient institution. It's a prestigious, in inverted commas, Russell Group institution that really celebrates research and its research intensity. So that influences a lot of the digital transformation decisions that the library needs to make. But it's not just all about research. Obviously, the student cohort is extremely important, and there are over 40,000 students studying at the University of Glasgow. And in a previous session at the conference, I did talk about how the two pillars of supporting research, world-leading research and world-leading student experience through learning and teaching is something that the university has been singularly focused on for a very, very long period of time, and they have been very consistent in that. So that does help us in the library and in the wider Information Services Directorate to plan for digital transformation. So that's important. In addition to the kind of digital transformation work that we're undertaking as part of Library Lens, we do have other digital transformation projects that are underway, most notably around changing some of our systems within the library. And those digital transformation exercises are really interesting as well as challenging. They're interesting because they sort of kick up a lot of unintended what's the word I'm looking for? It's sort of like a domino rally, so to speak, of consequences that might transpire or get kicked up as a result of changing one system. So it is kind of important to remember, and I think this is what Rachel was alluding to, that most of these things are connected, either digitally or in a cultural or organisational sense. And so the impact of changing systems or deploying new digital technologies can have a lot of unintended consequences.
Excellent, thank you. So yes, you're leading us into more of the specifics of your own situation. So just a question each about your own context. And Rachel, you're talking about changes and new things that have taken place in your institution. So where institutional priorities change and shift, and it can create a real complexity for all teams. So how do you navigate that changing landscape from a library's point of view?
I think fundamentally it's around keeping the focus on absolutely what the core purpose of what we are here for, not just as the library, but as the institution. Our priorities may well shift, But the reason we are here, for us, it's around that widening participation, enabling access to education for everyone who has that potential and the ability, not just for those from sort of privileged backgrounds. That is our fundamental core purpose. And then with 3 sort of priorities have been really clearly articulated around that, of just always be thinking either students, research or talent. And by that we mean the staff and the skills and the things that they bring to support those students and develop that research. And I think by understanding those and having really clear understanding of what those are, as and when priorities change, things that are unexpected, suddenly come up, it allows for a slightly quicker pivot and adaptation. I would say as well, for example, this summer, we did a reorganisation of the library and had a few other sort of pilots projects sort of lined up to start when priorities shifted, and we ended up having to set up very, very quickly a new site for students in a new town to support students who were transitioning out of being one of our partner institutions and becoming full BNU students. And obviously, that was very much an institutional priority. We had to get that done, which meant we had to drop or postpone and delay other things. But by aligning everything to that fundamental purpose, the ability for staff within the team to adapt and understand, actually, we really wanted to look at replacing our reading list system and spend more time on that this summer, but we know we haven't got the capacity, and this other thing is fundamentally far more important right now. It eased that sort of shift between those things.
Thank you. And Kay, I know you're doing work around changes and reorganization in the library as well. And how are you supporting staff in building digital skills, but also that confidence that we talked about during the Digifest sessions, and that professional identity that is needed for digital transformation to take hold?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the early days of a restructure within our library service. And I think there's 2 really key elements of that. One was about really establishing strong leadership in the library. And by leadership, what I wanted to achieve was that everyone felt they could take leadership in their own areas and that they had a voice and they were part of one team. It's very much about a one team culture. And therefore, the other part of that is really about kind of disrupting those hierarchies that have been around for a long time, and our teams perhaps not feeling that it was their role or they had the expertise to be involved in digital transformation, and that was somebody else's job and they just got on with the day job. So it is, very much about that cultural change, about empowering people, helping people feel that, they are the ones who know their roles best. They're the ones who know the function of what they do best. And therefore, looking at this from a very human point of view, that's the insight we need. And then we need to put that through the digital lens. But the really important bit, the fundamental bit, is the jobs and the expertise they have in their roles. So that's a big part of the restructure and a big part of what we're trying to achieve. And I would say the other element is really comes back to what Rachel was saying, which is really about being confident in what the role of the library is and having that confident leadership role that we can really clearly articulate what we have to bring. And sometimes, people in the library world can be reticent to do that. But to go out and really say, within everything that's happening at the university, within the curriculum, within the research landscape, these are the really core offers that we can bring to you to underpin and enable the bigger business of the university. And I think that is about confidence, and it is about leadership, and it is about letting people go out and take ownership, really, and have confidence in themselves.
Excellent, thank you. And I know that, George, digital skills for staff are also very important, but you also mentioned the systems migrations that you are in and engaged with at the moment. So what kind of challenges have you encountered with regards to people, the technology, and keeping your digital estate safe?
Yeah. So yes, we're in the process of implementing a new library management system, or LMS. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what that is, an LMS is essentially the system backbone that most large libraries depend upon. It enables us to describe digital and physical content, enable its discovery, acquire new digital and physical items, and many, many more other things. So it does touch all of the library staff, and for that reason, it is a huge digital transformation. Possibly more so because the system that we're currently on is a very old one. It's what we would describe as a legacy system. And of course, it's been through various software upgrades and patches, but ultimately it's about 30 years old in architectural system terms. So it's very old. And the university has been using it in one form or another for that whole time. So you can imagine that this change could be quite difficult for people. It's, I guess, for us, the difficulty or the challenge is the number of people impacted. So I mentioned about the touch points. I mean, there are well over 100 individuals in the library that use the library management system every day as a core part of their job. And there are probably, I don't know, another 50 after that still use the library management system once, sometimes more per week. And then, of course, I suppose it fans out to include staff and students who might be impacted. And of course, it is a technically complex migration because we're moving quite an old system. We have to think about system integrations, corporate integrations with student records and HR systems, but also with other third-party library products. However, as difficult as the technical challenges are, it's the old cliche that it comes down to people. And actually, it's the socio-technical challenges that are much more challenging. And I think it's quite useful to borrow a concept from software and IT development known as technical debt. So some of you might have heard this, and if you work in IT or in infrastructure, you'll be well familiar with technical debt. And this is the idea that an organization might forego the opportunity of moving to a new technology or a new system, and instead they retain the old one and just decide, right, we're going to stick with this old system. We're going to try to maintain it. We'll plug the software gaps. We'll worry about the cybersecurity implications. But of course, the longer that you do that, the more expensive it becomes to service that software, to worry about the cybersecurity considerations. And then ultimately, it's more expensive to move to the new system. And so people in IT and infrastructure are really alive to that, and they worry a lot about technical debt, but no one really talks about socio-technical debt. And in fact, I did a bit of Googling last night in preparation for this, and actually I can see in the literature really only in the last year are people talking about socio-technical debt and what that means. And it's a similar sort of phenomenon. People that are using, in our case, a library management system for 30 years are completely inculcated in that system, and they've developed their own ancillary processes and culture. Sometimes processes are offline processes. Sometimes they might even be digital processes. And for some people, it's an integral part of their job. And so when you start to tinker with systems that they've been using for that long, it becomes a very sensitive process. So that's really become a very critical issue for us, and the most challenging aspect of the project.
Excellent. Yes. So you've all talked about all sorts of complexities that you're dealing with. So when you're navigating all these complexities, how do you make sure that the library's role is, in whatever digital transformation you're leading on, is visible and understood and recognized across the organization, not just within your library team? Who wants to go first? Okay.
I think it comes back to being really clear and about what the library has to offer, and then really it's about making sure that you have a seat at those tables and you're confident at those tables, so you can go out and say, what you have to bring. So, for example, we're working really hard at the moment to make sure that we have a voice within the university's artificial intelligence steering group. We're leading work on the new student experience strategy along with our students' union, and digital transformation is built into that strategy. So all the key strategies, all the key initiatives that are going on in the university have this digital transformation strand, and we're really working hard to make sure that we have a place in all of those forums. But I would also, on a really simple level, say it is all about relationship management and wanting to work with people, wanting to collaborate, being ready to offer ourselves and to say yes to things that people want to involve us in, and just being really open to be part of what's going on and to be involved. And then I think we can begin to really not only articulate what we have to offer, but demonstrate and show what we have to offer and show the impact of that. So I think being open and ready and willing to work in partnership with people is really
Excellent.
key.
And Rachel, you were nodding, so do you want to go?
Yeah,
after?
thank you. I was sort of, a lot of what you've just done, actually, sort of also what George was saying around the new library management system project. It's really true, and I think for me and for us at BNU, I think one of the first things that was really key and pivotal in getting some of that visibility was when I joined. It was just as we were about to start the implementation of a new library management system. So the procurement had already taken place, but I get the fun of managing that implementation and steering it through. And I was relieved that it was a tool. We chose something I would have wanted anyway, so that was good. And very similarly, we were moving from something we'd had for 30 odd years, and people were so inculcated in the whole practice of that. But the library team were fully behind because they knew the challenges, and they knew, it was the old system was actually negatively impacting on student satisfaction because things were not working as they should. Some of the workarounds and the integrations had stopped working, and there was a sort of a challenge there. And by doing that project and doing it well, and by being good librarians, essentially, we understood our system, we understood the data that we have and how it works, how all it integrates to all the rest of the university, with the finance system from the procurement side, with student records. That project went really well, and the feedback actually at the end from our colleagues in IT, it was one of the best, we were one of the best stakeholders they'd ever worked with in an implementation because of how well we understood what what we do. And that comes back to understanding that core purpose. But that really built trust. And that was a fantastic opportunity then, as you said, people could see, the library do have this technical expertise, this knowledge, this understanding of how things work, but also back to how it's connected in, and that fundamental, I keep coming back to this thought from, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Dirk Gently books, but this fundamental interconnectedness of all things. And that's really where we are I feel often within the university, we are interconnected. We do not work in a silo. And by building, that successful project and building that trust has then enabled us to be seen as a trusted partner, and has built other connections have come in as a result. Yeah.
Excellent. And George, what are your reflections on navigating?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would just echo everything Kay, I was agreeing with everything Kay and Rachel were saying there. And we often forget that libraries have very often been at the forefront of technological change. And Kay was talking about that earlier. And it's something I do mention from time to time because, libraries were among the first organisations to use the internet. And I'm talking the internet, not the World Wide Web, but back in the 60s, exchanging bibliographic records so that people could discover content in faraway libraries, and even, devising metadata formats like Mark 21 that really revolutionized how information was discovered and communicated. But this idea of openness is something I think Kay mentioned is very important at the library. And for all of the challenges we have around digital culture and improving digital culture, I think in general, libraries and librarians are very good at being open to changes when it comes to digital technology and being pioneers. And I think that does get recognised by the institution, maybe not as often as we would like, but that's something that I need to address as a digital leader, and I do have a grand plan to improve that at the University of Glasgow.
Excellent. So we'll want to hear about that grand
Hatching
plan.
plans to improve that.
So I mentioned before that you're all part of the Digital Transformation Library Lens program, and I was wondering if you can share with us how you have used the Library Lens resources or other Jisc resources, and in what way, hopefully, they've supported you. Rachel?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I've used the lens sort of in a couple of ways. First off, as I mentioned, keep coming back to this, but we're very new as a department, as our own entity within the institution. So we've used it to baseline where we are, but also to help as that, in many ways, provide a sort of sense of legitimacy to some of the things that we're saying and our expertise by having this thing that was created, by a group with Jisc, Jisc's name, that creation. It's not just me or the library talking about it in our own institution. This is across the sector, and that's been hugely powerful. Just having that backing, really. And I also used it as around. There's a sort of sense of how we're talking about ourselves and what we do, and it's really helped me in particular in meetings, but also colleagues, sort of maybe adjust our language, and we've got more of a common language about talking about these things now. So I'm not talking too much in detail around some of the very specific technical library things, using library jargon and things like that. We're looking much more at that top level stuff with that shared language. And on a slightly more practical note, I mean, in January, we just took responsibility for the first time for our research repository and open access publishing and support, which didn't sit within the library before. And actually, we used the lens. I used the lens in the planning of that handover from the research office to help work out, well, where are we? Where's the university? What is it I need to be doing? And where are we going with this? And then the person who's sort of leading on that has been using it to sort of help them, sort of educate them and inform them, and sort of direct them off into other areas of support from Jisc and other sort of communities as well.
That's really great to hear. And Kay?
Yeah, I mean, it's helped in so many incredible ways, really. And to echo what Rachel said, I think first and foremost is that endorsement piece, that it gives you confidence and it gives you that common language and that framework. So you don't feel such a lone voice. You've kind of got this endorsement that this is an established model. The fact that it's taken kind of the Jisc digital transformation model and then singled out libraries, that you're applying that through a library lens, I think gives you a huge amount of confidence, because we know in libraries what experts we are. And we know that we hold the expertise in information literacy and critical thinking and evaluation, and in digital enabled spaces and collections. But to actually have that in a framework, I think, does give you a certain amount of confidence. I think as well, it sounds obvious, but it's just the connections, working with you, Paola, and the team, and having that, every time we meet on progress calls, we come away with a million ideas and suggestions of other people to contact and those connections. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier about it's all about people and relationships, and that just grows incrementally every time we meet with more people to talk about. And also being part of having other partners, being with you two today and the other partner institutions. It just builds a whole new community that you're part of, really, which is really helpful and keeps you focused, I think.
Excellent, thank you. That's always a very important part of the Jisc work. There's this idea of community, bringing people together. And what about you, George?
Well, I would echo the sort of communication aspect within the program, because it is good just to talk, and sometimes it's a sort of, maybe it descends into a kind of group therapy session at times, but
We have a bit of those as well.
yeah. But in general, it's just really good to hear what's happening at other institutions. And I mean, even just during our previous session, Kay mentioned something about case studies in, highlighting the value of libraries to the upper echelons of a university. And, after that, I was asking Kay about that, and, it was not really something I had considered seriously, but it's definitely something I am now. But more generally, the library lens has been useful in helping with our institutional strategy. Well, less the institutional strategy and more the information service response to the institutional strategy, because University of Glasgow has a new strategy. It's about to be published. It's going to be a 10-year strategy, so it's really difficult to predict what's going to be happening in the next 10 years. And of course, the information services, I was part of a team that had to respond to the university strategy and really set out how information services was going to support that strategy. And the library lens was quite helpful in that regard, because it does present a technology agnostic way of appraising all the different areas where a library might be active, and you can kind of plot where you are, a bit like what Rachel said. And so you can look at your service areas and say, oh right, we're a bit rubbish there, we need to redouble our efforts, particularly in the next 10 years and so on. So it has been used really effectively in that way. But the other way that it's used, and I'm hoping that this is going to be a long-term impact, is that we just get into the habit of using it and reviewing it perhaps every year, part of the whole agenda around improving the digital culture, that we just need to be a library that's much more prepared to seize digital disruption. So taking the library management system as an example, I don't want us to be a library that's languishing on systems for decades. In the years following the launch of our new system, probably 2029, we'll start reviewing that system, and we'll be making a determination about whether or not we're going to stick with it for all of the reasons to do with technical debt, socio-technical debt, and so on. And we will move to another system, and we just need to be more prepared and less scared. And I guess the line is, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Yes. So yeah. That'll be the line that I'm taking.
The closing line, yes.
library.
But I have a final question. Thank you so much, George. Just what one piece of advice would you give each of you to libraries that are setting off on sort of similar challenges to you? What would you say to them? Just one little tip. Or can be two.
I'm trying to summarize them, so you go first,
Okay.
I think.
Okay, you go then.
My piece of advice would be not to think that everybody is a million miles ahead of you, because I think a really positive thing to come out of being part of this pilot is, in the nicest possible way, to recognise that we're not. We're all pretty much at the same point in the journey, and that is really gives you confidence. But perhaps my biggest piece of advice, I think, that I've learned certainly in the work we've been doing at Teesside, is just to say yes to everything, really enthusiastically, yes to being involved in everything, yes to partnering with people, and then say yes first and then think about how you're going to make it work afterwards is my philosophy.
Excellent. So definitely no fear there.
No.
I think I would just follow on. I seem to be coming out with all of these idioms, but I think there is another idiom around, if you stand in the middle of the road for too long, you get run over, and I think, that is quite a good idiom to bear in mind in libraries. You've got to constantly be moving. And so that's related to this saying yes to everything, because it is very easy to say, oh, we don't have time, it's not a priority, but you really do have to make the space and time, because you cannot afford to remain, static.
Excellent. And Rachel?
I mean, I would agree. It's say yes to everything, then work out what you're going to do. But also, I think for me, I think one of the huge benefits of using the lens and being involved in this is that at first everything seemed overwhelming, and as Kay said, it's finding out, we're pretty much all in the same boat, actually.
Yeah.
I felt that everyone was so far advanced and we had so far to go, and actually that's not the case. But also making sure as you are on that journey, once you've said yes to things and you've started doing stuff and you've planned out, making sure you give yourself and your team time to actually stop and reflect and look back at how far you've come, because we've changed and we've gone through so much change in the last few years as an organisation, as a department. And sometimes it feels like, we've still got so much change ahead, and I go sometimes into the calls with Jisc on the progress calls on this part and think nothing has changed. I've done nothing, we've done nothing, made no progress. And actually just that hour or those 45 minutes to sit back and reflect, and you realise actually quite how much has changed, whether it's social, in sort of somewhat intangible things, or actually, we have now started a project which will launch a system or a new service. It's just give yourself that time to reflect and look back and celebrate that progress.
Wow, thank you. We're ending really on an energetic and positive note here. So thank you very much, Rachel, Kay and George, for sharing such practical and honest views and insights. So we've heard how three quite different but connected scenarios and use cases and views of how libraries are taking this digital transformation from ambition and strategy into everyday action, and the great role, fundamental role that libraries have to really contribute strategically to digital transformation within their own institutions. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that yes, the Library Lens has been a useful resource for you. For those of you who haven't looked at it yet, you can Google it. Just Google Jisc Digital Transformation Library Lens and you will find it there. It's a fairly sort of substantial report, but we have a couple of smaller and brief, shorter versions. So please do have a look at it. And finally, thank you all here for joining us on this live recording and at Digifest. It's been really great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.